Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring some pretty profound ideas
Hmm.
about ourselves and the world around us. You've shared some excerpts from A Beautiful Place to Get Lost, and it seems to really delve into some interesting things like self-discovery and love, and even like the limits of language. You ready to get lost in some deep thoughts together?
Absolutely. I think what strikes me most is how this text tackles these big philosophical questions without getting too bogged down in jargon. It's really like an invitation to think differently about our everyday experiences.
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out at me was this idea of control, or actually like the illusion of control. It's like the author's saying we get so caught up in trying to control our thoughts and our lives,
Mhm.
and that can actually be what's holding us back.
Right. And there's this really striking analogy that the author uses to kind of illustrate this point. They talk about a kite versus a bird. And you know how a kite needs that constant tubbing and adjusting to stay aloft? Well, a bird just effortlessly rides the currents of the wind. And it really makes you think, where in our own lives are we clinging to the kite strings too tightly?
That's a great question. Yeah, I,
Mm.
I can definitely relate to that. Like trying to force things to go a certain way, only to end up feeling more frustrated. So, what would it look like to be more like the bird? To embrace that sense of surrender.
Yeah, well, that's where the text's exploration of letting go comes in. And it's not about, just giving up or becoming passive, but it's more about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is release our grip on the things that we think we need to control. And this idea actually has some roots in pretty fascinating scientific research as well.
Yeah.
For example, studies on mindfulness and meditation, they've shown that letting go of our constant need to analyze and control our thoughts can actually lead to things like decreased anxiety and a greater sense of well-being.
That makes sense. It's like we're so used to being in this like constant state of mental overdrive
Yeah.
that we forget what it even feels like to simply be.
Exactly. And this ties into another one of the key concepts that the text explores, which is the nature of the self. The author kind of challenges that idea of the I as this fixed, solid entity. And it's presented more as this fluid collection of experiences, constantly kind of evolving and changing.
It almost sounds like they're saying that there's no real self at all, just a series of like fleeting moments all strung together.
Well, not quite. It's more about recognizing that our sense of self is a construction,
Hmm.
shaped by our experiences and our memories and the stories we tell ourselves. And even neuroscientifically, there's this understanding of the self as a dynamic process, not a static thing. Different parts of the brain light up depending on what we're doing, feeling, or thinking.
So it's like our sense of self is more of a verb than a noun, a constant process of becoming
Hmm.
rather than a fixed state of being.
I like that. And this whole exploration of the self gets even more interesting when the author starts to tackle the limits of language. And they make this really interesting comparison of words to clothing and meaning to the body. What do you make of that?
Okay, let me see if I'm getting this right. Are they saying that words are just sort of a covering, a way to like point to meaning, but they can't ever fully capture the essence of what we're trying to express?
That's a great way to put it. It's like, trying to describe the taste of chocolate to someone who's never had it before.
Yeah.
Words can only go so far.
It reminds me of those moments when you're having a really profound experience, like maybe you're watching an incredible sunset or listening to a piece of music that moves you deeply. Yeah. And you just can't find the words to adequately describe what you're feeling.
Exactly. The experience just totally transcends the limits of language. And this leads us to another really intriguing idea that the author keeps circling back to, which is this idea of love as the antidote to isolation and fear. I mean, they actually say love is what a human can be. That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, that one stopped me in my tracks too. It's like they're suggesting that love isn't just something we feel, but it's our very potential as human beings. But how do we even begin to wrap our heads around that kind of love? It just feels so different from the way that love is often portrayed in our culture.
I think the key here is understanding the kind of love that the author is describing. It's not about romantic love or even familial love necessarily. It's a much more expansive kind of love. It's rooted in openness and acceptance and this deep sense of connection with ourselves and with everything around us. It's a love that really transcends those boundaries that we so often put up between ourselves and others. It's a love that recognizes the interconnectedness of all things. And interestingly, there's even some scientific support for this idea. Studies have shown that practicing compassion and cultivating that sense of connection with others can actually lead to physical changes in the brain, increasing activity in the areas associated with empathy and social bonding.
Wow, that's amazing. So it's not just like some fluffy feel-good concept. There's like actual science backing it up.
Yeah.
But how do we even begin to cultivate that kind of love, especially in a world that can feel so divided and disconnected sometimes?
Well, the text seems to suggest that it all starts with self-awareness. The author talks about the importance of doubt and honesty in the journey of self-discovery. It's about being willing to question our assumptions, to look at our own beliefs and biases with a critical eye.
But doesn't that go against like everything we've been taught? I mean, we're constantly told to be confident, to believe in ourselves, to never doubt our abilities.
Right, but I think there's a difference between like having healthy self-confidence and blind faith. The kind of doubt that the author's talking about is more about intellectual humility. It's recognizing that we don't have all the answers and being open to different perspectives. And cognitive psychology actually shows us that our brains are wired to look for patterns and assumptions, which can be helpful for like navigating the world, but it can also lead to biases and closed-mindedness if we're not careful.
So it's like we need to learn to question those like automatic assumptions and be more mindful of how our own experiences and beliefs are shaping the way we see the world.
Exactly. And this ties back into that whole idea of the self as a construction. If our sense of self is fluid and ever changing, then it stands to reason that our beliefs and perspectives can also evolve over time.
Yeah, I'm really starting to see how all of these different ideas are interconnected. Letting go of control, recognizing the limits of language, embracing doubt, it all seems to be pointing toward this more open, flexible way of being in the world.
And that openness is really crucial for cultivating the kind of love that the author is talking about. It's a love that's not based on like conditions or expectations, but on this deep acceptance of ourselves and others as we are, flaws and all.
But how do we deal with those flaws, both in ourselves and in others? I mean, the text also delves into some pretty dark territory. Fear, anger, even hate. How do those emotions fit into this framework of love and acceptance?
Well, that's where this concept of self-compassion comes in. The author doesn't shy away from these difficult emotions that are just part of the human experience. It's not about pretending that they don't exist, but it's about learning to meet them with kindness and understanding, rather than judgment. And there's actually a growing body of research in psychology showing that self-compassion can be incredibly powerful for emotional regulation and well-being.
So it's like instead of beating ourselves up for feeling angry or afraid, we can acknowledge those feelings and try to understand where they're coming from.
Exactly. And this applies to our relationships with others as well. The text suggests that the way we treat others is often a reflection of how we treat ourselves.
I mean, if we're constantly judging and criticizing ourselves, we're more likely to project that judgment onto other people.
That's the idea. And on the flip side, if we can cultivate self-compassion, we're more likely to extend that same compassion to those around us, even those who may have like hurt or disappointed us.
This is all starting to make a lot of sense. But I have to admit, I'm still kind of struggling with this idea of embracing the meaninglessness of existence.
It sounds so, well, bleak.
I understand where you're coming from, but I think it's important to make a distinction between meaninglessness and purposelessness. The text isn't saying that our lives are inherently without purpose. It's more about challenging this notion that meaning needs to come from some external source, like
Yeah.
some grand narrative or some ultimate goal.
So it's not about finding meaning, it's about creating meaning.
Exactly. And the author uses this analogy of life as a game, like a game played without seriousness. The point isn't to win or lose, but to simply enjoy the experience of playing. And this really resonates with a lot of existentialist philosophy, which emphasizes that we have this incredible freedom to create our own meaning and our own values.
It's like that shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. Instead of being attached to these specific outcomes, we can just focus on the process, the journey of exploration and growth. I love that connection. And that's where the text's emphasis on presence comes in. It's about being fully engaged in the present moment, rather than dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
Which is easier said than done, right? I mean, our minds are constantly pulling us in so many different directions.
Absolutely. But there are practices like mindfulness and meditation that can help us cultivate that sense of presence. And the more we can be present, the more we can appreciate those simple joys of being alive, even in the midst of all the challenges and uncertainties.
It's like we're being invited to step out of the autopilot mode of our lives and really savor the experience of being human.
And that includes embracing that full spectrum of human emotions, from joy and love to sadness and grief. The text seems to suggest that all of these emotions are valuable, that they each have something to teach us about ourselves and the world around us.
It's like we're being challenged to stop running away from the difficult stuff and to see it all as part of the tapestry of life.
Exactly. And that acceptance, that willingness to embrace the full spectrum of human experience, that's really at the heart of the author's vision of love.
It's a beautiful vision, but I have to admit, it's a pretty radical one. It seems to go against so much of what we're taught to believe about ourselves and the world.
It is radical, isn't it? It's like they're asking us to completely rethink our relationship with ourselves and with others and with the world around us.
Yeah, and one of the relationships that really stood out to me in this piece was that connection between humanity and nature. There's this sense of reverence for the natural world that runs throughout, almost like nature itself is a character in this story.
Absolutely. The author describes nature as not just a source of beauty and inspiration, but as a teacher, a mirror reflecting our own true nature back to us.
Yeah, there's that passage about, like, lying by the riverbed, watching the play of light and shadow, the wind dancing with the plants. It's almost like a meditation, a call to slow down and reconnect with the rhythms of the natural world.
And that connection with nature seems to be so deeply intertwined with the author's understanding of love. Remember, they describe love as that state of openness and acceptance and vulnerability, qualities that are also reflected in the natural world.
It makes you wonder if by immersing ourselves in nature, if we can kind of tap into that same sense of effortless flow, that same capacity for love and acceptance.
It's a beautiful idea, and it actually aligns with the growing body of research in ecopsychology, which explores the interconnectedness between human well-being and the health of the natural world. Studies have shown that spending time in nature can have a really profound impact on our mental and emotional health, reducing stress, boosting our mood, even enhancing creativity.
So it's not just about escaping the hustle and bustle of city life. It's about reconnecting with something deeper, something that's essential to our well-being as human beings.
Exactly. And I think that's a key message that the author is trying to convey throughout this whole piece. It's about stripping away all those layers of conditioning, the societal expectations, the stories we tell ourselves, and rediscovering that essential core of who we are.
That journey of self-discovery, it sounds both liberating and terrifying at the same time.
It's definitely not always easy. The text acknowledges that letting go of those old patterns and those limiting beliefs can be really challenging. It takes courage and honesty and a willingness to face the parts of ourselves that we may have been avoiding.
But it sounds like the rewards are worth it. To experience that kind of freedom, that deep sense of connection with yourself and the world around you, that's a pretty powerful motivator.
Absolutely. And ultimately, that's what this text is an invitation to do, to embark on that journey of self-discovery, to embrace the fullness of who we are, and to live a life that's more aligned with our deepest values and aspirations.
This deep dive has been incredible. I feel like I've gained so many new insights. It's definitely a piece that I'll be revisiting and reflecting on for a long time to come.
Me too. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of truly great writing. It stays with you long after you've finished reading it, sparking new questions and inviting you to see the world in a different light.
So what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this deep dive?
I think the biggest takeaway is that invitation to question, to explore, to never stop learning and growing. It's about recognizing that life is a journey, not a destination, and that the beauty really lies in that process of discovery.
Beautifully said. And maybe, as the author suggests, it's embracing the unknown, letting go of that need for certainty and control that we truly find ourselves. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep loving.